Welcome to What's on Your Bookshelf with your hosts, Denise Russo and Samantha Powell.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of What's on Your Bookshelf. This is a podcast where we are exploring what we're learning through the books on our bookshelf. We're in the midst of walking through a really great best-selling book called Atomic Habits by James Clear. We're up to chapter 3 now, and I'm so excited to, of course, have back my co-host, Sam Powell. Sam, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Probably should have used another cup of coffee, but doing well. How about you?
I feel the same. I think I've put my cup of coffee back in the microwave like 3 times already today, but it's just been one of those days. So really looking forward to getting into better habits together. Maybe that's the first thing, is to be able to actually drink my coffee while it's still warm. Oh, goodness. So tell me a little bit about what's this chapter we're going through today.
Yeah, so this is how to build better habits in 4 simple steps. And this is the end of the intro. This is really the end of the buildup to the meat of this book, because from here on out, it's divided into 4 sections. They're all the 4 laws. So this is really the introductory to what those 4 laws are and why your brain builds habits, and really understanding what a habit kind of cognitively is, so that you can understand, okay, then how do we build good ones and how do we break bad ones? So we're going to give you that intro today and really talk through what that looks like, because the meat of it's coming in the future episodes here.
Yeah, that sounds really good. You know, we've talked in the past, probably several episodes, we've talked in the past about how if we think about the outcomes and results we have in our life, if we want them to be different than what we have, then we have to not only do something different, but the doing or the not doing really comes from in the way we think and in what we process about the thing that we're going to be doing. And one of the things that was striking in the beginning of this chapter is that James talks about how different scientists were experimenting with animals. And in this case, in the book, it's cats, but it could be even, what scientists do with mice as an example, where they're trying to build habits or build patterns. I guess patterns is probably the right word. And what these scientists were finding is that as they were testing these cats to build habits, or to train them, if you will, is that every time the cat had a satisfactory result, that they would then somehow get a neurological pathway that was putting together that it was a satisfactory result that they enjoyed. And so that's how that habit started forming. And so if we really think about how our brains work, it's really not that much different, that if you repeat things enough times, it'll become automatic. You think about how, I don't know, maybe the first time ever that your parents taught you how to brush your teeth, it wasn't really automatic. But now, do you really think about the activity of brushing your teeth in the morning, in the evening? Probably not so much. It's something that has become automatic, but you also do things over trial and error. And the book talks about that a little bit. Like, for example, I'm right-handed. Sam, you're left-handed, right?
No, I'm right-handed.
You're right-handed. Why did I think you were left-handed? Oh. Well, you think of the right and a left brain very well together, but so I'm right-handed, and so I brush my teeth with my right hand. But can you imagine if you could probably even pretend to do this right now. If you were to have your toothbrush in your left hand, it's like unnatural, right? I can't even imagine. You can't see us on the camera right now, but I can't imagine being able to brush my teeth with my left hand. And so that's all about the neurological activity when you're doing something. And so James goes on to talk about how that hits our brains as we're trying to create habits. Sometimes you stumble along the way as well, though. So you might be doing something and something changed. You mentioned in one of our last episodes, Sam, how you had a habit of flossing your teeth, speaking of brushing our teeth, but then something changed. So talk a little bit about that. How did you go from having this habit that was ingrained to suddenly it was no longer a habit?
I don't know. Probably just got difficult to do, or I ran out of floss at one point and didn't go to the store and buy it because that was hard or something. I don't know. I honestly can't remember how it fell off. But if I think about how most habits fall off, and it's kind of where we'll end up in the 4-step process here, is that when it's difficult, it's not going to work out. And it's funny that, as James is explaining this and setting up, why your brain's building habits, like you said, right? It's this repeated thing, but it's really that your brain is stumbling across some kind of reward. And and James says this, like your brain goes, wait a minute, that felt good. What did I do right before that? Right. So your brain
Mhm.
is trying to create these pathways and these thought processes about like, ooh, this was great. Like, let's do it again. What happened right before that? And so that's the very basic fundamental of habit forming. And the same kind of thing I think of habit losing, right? It's like
Mhm.
saying is, oh, you know what? It felt good not to go to the store and buy more floss. So I didn't, right? It felt good to sit here and rest and not actually go do the thing. And then next thing you know, right, the habit's broken because it's just been too long since that repeated behavior was happening.
Yeah, sometimes I think we just were comfortable in a certain scenario. It makes me think about this person that I've been coaching recently had a situation where someone was working for him that was deciding to leave their role. And this person had been with him for a really long time. So he was comfortable. There was a habit of working together with this other person. And so it threw off this leader when the person said they were going to leave their job. And so suddenly there was this unexpected alteration in the norm. And so the first, I say, knee jerk response, I suppose, was that the person I was coaching was really thrown off about, well, now what am I going to do? This is horrible. This great high potential person with great performance is leaving me. But the end result, as we worked through it, is that, as you shared with the book, James talks about how unexpected rewards alter your strategy for the next time. Well, we were going through the coaching session, and this leader had said, well, actually, now that I think about it, this particular person that's leaving had two primary jobs. Let's, for the sake of the discussion, call it marketing and sales. And those are two activities that aren't exactly the same. They're parallel, they work together, but they're not the same. And so he decided, well, what if I could take those activities and separate them apart? And then take the money that I was spending on this full-time resource, but create two contract or two part-time jobs individually for those other two things. And you know what the end result of it was that he had to start kind of over again. He had these things we've been talking about in the book so far. There was a cue, there was a craving, and then he had to do something to have a response. Now, he hasn't seen the reward yet, but the reward we're anticipating is that the work that the one person was doing isn't going to be lost just because that person is leaving. There's always a loss when somebody leaves their job, but the gain is that he was able to reinvent the strategy for how he wanted to use this role going forward. So I think it ended up being a pretty interesting success story, but it all started from you. Something happened that raised his attention. In this case, it was something outside of his control. So that's probably another thing to talk about, is that sometimes things change in our lives that aren't just in our control, but we do have the control for what we do about the response to it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, and James frames it up as that habits are simply reliable solutions to recurring problems. And so what he's saying is that our brain, as we're facing problems, especially recurring problems, we work to automate those solutions. And sometimes when you, like you're saying, like when you step out of habitual situation, then all of a sudden you've broken that thought process of like, oh, I was just automatically going to this person for this thing overall, right? It's like as soon as I face this problem, I go here and this is the solution and that's what's happening. But when that situation and environment changes, then all of a sudden that 1, 2, 3, 4 step of going through this is broken. And so now you have to look for something different, because at the end of the day, our habits are just our reliable solutions to the recurring problems inside our environment.
Absolutely. I think a lot about what's happening in the work environment today. There's just so much change constantly, right? And then people act surprised that there's change, but the only real constant in business is transformation and change. And I'm curious if you can think about leaders that you've worked with in the past, Sam, that are really good at change. And what kind of habits do those leaders have that help them navigate change, knowing that there's something that is not normal because there's something being changed, but because they have habits to be able to navigate change, they've been able to go through it smoothly. I'm pretty sure you have a couple good examples, if even not from yourself, about what are those habits for people that are leading that aren't just in a stable environment?
It's an interesting question because I think that when your environment becomes destabilized, your habits are broken. So it's interesting. Like I would think the habits that good change leaders have are probably more around how to get us back to stability because the issue with change always is that it puts us into a place of instability, which is a fundamental need that people have because it hits to our fundamental need of safety,
Mhm.
right? So when we really think about, what are we really looking for? And I'm a big advocate that I think almost all human behavior comes back to, and I think that James kind of supports this a bit, comes back to that need for safety at the end of the
Mhm.
day. Where I feel safe and when I feel safe, that's when I can be at my best. That's when I can free up my cognitive processing for other things, right? I can be creative. I can take risks. But if I don't have that stability and that safety, then I can't do that. And so when I think about change management and I think about the habits, it's going to be the leaders who are good at change management are the leaders who can quickly get us back to, like, right, they've got good habits themselves to take chaos and turn us back into a stable environment. Yes, there's a lot of change around us, but what are the things that we do to get us back into safety world and into this place where we are okay again and can then move forward. And the leaders who can help take you from chaos to stability quickly and have whatever habits you need to make that happen, which is probably a lot of organization, communication skills, like those types of things,
Mhm.
are really going to move us there. And habits are the same kind of cognitive space for us too. James says habits reduce our cognitive load and free up our mental capacity so you can allocate your attention to other tasks.
Mhm.
And that's really what I think about when I think about, what we're talking about here is this ability to free up my thought process around whatever threats, whatever things are going on around me, and give myself space to just do. And so the habits and what our brain is trying to do is to get us into that safe space where our brain is freed up for other things, right? Like this is why you have your best shower thoughts, because you're going through this repetitive habitual motion. Your brain is freeing you up from cognitive processing. And so now your brain is allowed to wander and it's allowed to think about other things. And that's really what our brains are trying to do for us. Get us into this safe space, get us into a space where then, oh, okay, we can go into other things. It's why it's why I need like a notebook that is waterproof because I have all my best thoughts in the shower or like, at night, right, as you're trying to fall asleep or whatever, right? You process through your day, you're kind of getting into whatever space you get into to fall asleep. And then it's like, oh, bam, idea. Here's that problem solved because we're constantly trying to solve those problems in our lives.
I like that. I like the balance that you're talking about. So safety and stability at the foundation, but remembering there might be people on the team that like change and variety. And where do you get that balance? Like for me, I like change and variety. My husband likes stability and safety. So last night we were getting ready to take our kids back to college to move back into their dorms. So we were celebrating out to dinner. And we went to Universal Studios because we live in Florida. Now, I used to work at Universal Studios as one of my very first jobs many, many years ago. And so it's always reminiscent for me to go back there. But when I went into the park, as always, something new was there. Something had changed there. Something had maybe grown there that wasn't there from before. And it needed to grow because if Universal or Disney or SeaWorld or any major business stays the same, it won't grow with the times. And so things do have to emerge. And so that's where this nice balance is between change and variety and safety and stability. And so, anyway, we went to dinner. And there's so many restaurants to go to when you go to these parks. And so I always like to go to new places. Well, my opposite attracts husband likes to go to the same places. And so we went to the place that he always likes to go, his trusted place. And he ordered the same thing he always orders every single time. And he's super happy with it every single time. But I always order something different, always. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not good. But then I find things that I think, oh man, now this will be my new favorite thing, but I wouldn't have known it if I hadn't tried it. And so James talks in the book about how habits actually don't restrict your freedom, they create it. And sometimes you have to create new habits or break old habits. But he goes on to talk about a couple of things that I know we've talked about in past episodes as well, which is that people who don't have their habits handled are often the ones with the least amount of freedom. And this is what you were just talking about as far as cementing good habits. James talks about how without good financial habits, you will always be struggling for the next dollar, as one example. In fact, I was talking with someone recently who was really fearing being able to invest their money into something that would help them grow. But because they didn't have good financial habits, they didn't have the freedom to do this thing that would help break them away from the thing that was keeping them stuck. The second thing that James talks about is that without good health habits, you'll always seem to be short on energy. And I notice this about myself, maybe you do as well, Sam, is that when I sit down all day long, sitting in front of the computer and I don't stand up, I just feel sluggish. I feel blah. I feel tired. I feel like I have to have coffee. But whenever I go outside and exercise or get fresh air or eat something healthy, I always feel better. That's good health habits and it'll increase your energy. Without good learning habits, you'll always feel like you're behind the curve. I'm so excited because coming up, you and I are going to be at a conference. This will air after we've already gotten back. So it'll be interesting to think about that when we hear this episode. But you and I are going to a conference next week to increase and elevate our good learning habits. What do you think about that for leaders, Sam? Why is it important for leaders to have good financial, health, and learning habits?
No, I think it transcends maybe leaders, and it's probably everybody needs that stuff, right? Because those are the things that give us, again, like going back to that stable foundation, that safe foundation that sets us up to have the freedom that we really want, right? Like when it comes down to what are our most basic needs, those are the things that hit it, right?
Yeah.
And so it's, I really think that it comes down to that. And if you're a leader, you have to be the example, right? You have to be the thing you want to see in the world, the thing you want to see in the people who are in your charge. And you really got to exemplify that stuff. But it comes down to if you are, and it comes back to the hierarchy of needs, right? If you can't get those most basic needs, you can never get to this place where you've got the freedom to pursue your passions and, really get to your potential and things like that. So I think that's why if you think about habits as being so incredibly powerful and like atomic, like this book is talking about, that's really what it comes down to. If you can create these systems for yourself that free up your cognitive processing, that free up your space and your time and your energy, then what could you do with that, right? And that's really, I think, where your life begins, is when you can get that space of freedom. But you have to have this stable foundation, and you've got to do that from a place of good habits.
Absolutely. The kids and I were watching this video yesterday, I think from Susie Orman, I think. And she was talking about in the video about how if at the age of 25, you saved $100 a month until the age of retirement, you'd be a millionaire. But if you waited just 10 years to start saving that $100 a month, you'd only have $300,000 in your retirement. And so she was basically speaking to young people. My kids are 18 and 21. And so the point was start habits early, because the compound effect of that could be just enormous. And so let's talk a little bit about what James says about the science behind how the habits work. There's these 4 steps. We've talked about them before, but let's talk about how maybe even in this example, there's a cue that happens first, which is noticing the reward or the thing that you want. But it's followed by a craving, which is saying that you actually want that thing. So something comes into your sphere of mind that says you notice something, but then you have to want the thing, because you won't start a habit if you don't want it. The response to it, which is step 3 for James, is obtaining the reward. So that's the action. So you have a thought about something, you have a belief about something, you have an action about something, and then we chase rewards because they serve two purposes. They either one, satisfy us, or they teach us. And so what would you like to add to that? Because I know that you really got into teaching me offline about this habit loop.
Yeah. So just so that everybody's really clear on this. So the 4 steps are cue, craving, response, reward. And this is the 4-step pattern that James says is the backbone of every habit. And your brain runs through these steps in that same order every time. So there's a cue, there's a craving, there's a response, and a reward. And so the cue is the bit of information that predicts what's going to happen. It's like your trigger that says, hey, this is happening. The craving is the motivational force behind whatever habit you've got. So every craving is linked to some desire to change your internal state. And I think that's really important for people to understand, right? This craving is whatever is going on inside of me, I want it to be different, right? I am hungry and I would like to not be hungry, right? I'm stressed out and I would like to not be stressed out. Or I am, I'm tired and I would like to rest, right? So it's this thing that makes you want to change your internal state. And then the response is the actual thing you perform, right? The habit that you do, you go and you reach for chips when you're stressed, whatever it is. And then the reward's that end goal habit. And like you said, it satisfies your craving. That's its one big thing. And then it teaches us what actions are worth remembering, right? So if we think back to what we just said, right? Your habit loop is helping you free up your cognitive processing. It's getting you to the reward because your brain says, "Ooh, I liked that," right? Oh, that was good. And so then you go through this process every time of something triggers you, something cues you, and then you get that craving that's like, "Oh, I want to be in this different internal state. So then I'm going to take this action because this is the habit that I formed." And then I get the reward of like, yep, pleasure, pleasure centers in your brain are firing up and they say, yep, yep, yep. Love it, love it, love it. Like, I know for me, like a habit that I had realized I didn't realize I had because it becomes just so natural is that like I would get stressed out and then I would immediately go reach for like a snack, just something to like occupy my mouth, right? Of just like chewing, that movement of like nervous tick, like, oh gosh, I just have that anxiety feeling. So I would go and snack on something. And so, right, there was this trigger or this cue of something happened that gives me that feeling. I have this craving to change this state, this internal state for what it is. And my reaction would be to go grab, a piece of chocolate from the bar or like a salty snack or, chip or something. And then that pleasure center would be triggered in my brain and be like, oh gosh, I just feel better. And I was doing that without even thinking it. I would be eating a chocolate bar before I even realized I was stressed out, right? Like that's how quickly those habits really form. So like I realized that was not good. That's not what I wanted. So I bought this giant tub of gum and I put it on my desk. So when I have that feeling now, it's changed and I grab this piece of gum and I chew. And I'm like, oh, okay, like, right. It's that same movement and it feels better. So when we think about this loop, that's really what we're talking about. And I talked to a friend one time who's like, oh gosh, I broke up with a boyfriend one time when I was in college, and my friend came over with a box of wine and a bag of chocolate. She goes, but that's not my stress response. My stress response is to go on a 5-mile run. So like, right, she's doing way better than me, but like now her cue, right, when she gets that stress cue, she's like immediately craves that endorphin high. And so then her habit is to go do something really active, go walk around the block, go do whatever. I watched her like kids sporting events. She would go when her kids up, it's their turn to do something. She's like walking a lap around because she's all stressed out about it. Right. Whereas like mine would be like, I'm going to reach in my bag and pull out some gum and like, right. But it's the same thing. So when we think about it and you think about habits, really understanding that is key.
Absolutely. Well, to simplify this for the listener even further, just think of it this way: is there's two things happening. There's a problem phase and a solution phase. There's something you want to change, and there's something that needs to change that ends up changing if you actually create the good habit. So in the problem phase, it's the cue and the craving. In the solution phase, it's the response and the reward. And James says that all behavior is driven by a desire to solve a problem. Sometimes the problem is that you notice something good and you want to obtain it. Sometimes the problem is that you're experiencing pain and you want to relieve it. Either way, the purpose of every habit is to solve the problems that you face. James goes on to talk about these 4 laws of behavior change in this chapter, and he has a really great way of describing the difference between creating a good habit and then the inverse of how do you break a bad habit. And I think we'll ask Scott to share some of that in the show notes as an extra take in interest of time today. But whenever you want to change your behavior, James suggests at the end of this chapter that you ask yourself 4 things. Number 1, how can I make it obvious? 2, how can I make it attractive? 3, how can I make it easy? And 4, how can I make it satisfying? That's how you change your behavior when you want to change your habits. So this has been really good for me to think through some of the things that I want to do before next time together. My life is about to change because my kids are getting ready to go back to school, and they're older than your kids because they're getting ready to go back to school, but moving away to do it and going into living in dorms. And so I'm thinking even right now, as we're talking together, about some of the habits that I'll be able to change and the way that I'll also have disruption in my home by having absence and not having things that I'm used to and people that I'm used to being here. How about for you, Sam? What did this chapter say to you this time?
I think it really helped me. I'm a big process person. So this really helped me think about what is that process that my habits are going through and really thinking about, well, what can I do to make that different, right? Like if I can recognize cues, if I can figure that out, like what can I do? And so I think it got me really excited for the rest of this book because it goes into these 4 questions that you asked, right? It really turns them into 4 laws of like how to address your cues, your craving, your response, reward, and making those things attractive. So I think it got me really excited for like maybe there's hope for me for changing some of these habits that I would like to be different. So it just helped me, I think, I don't know, free up my understanding and get me really excited for next chapters.
I'm excited too. The next chapters coming up are going to be talking about really thinking through how do we practice to make habits stick, and what are the best ways to start new habits. So until next time, thanks so much for joining us again. On behalf of my friend Sam Powell, my name is Denise Russo, and this has been another episode of What's on Your Bookshelf.